companies develop programs for different reasons. And just thinking back to when Frank Sander famously talked about fitting the forum to the fuss in the 1976 Pound Conference, it's that companies will actually create systems to address a concern. Like the clients that we've worked with here at MWI have included Coca-Cola Enterprises, General Motors, BMW of North America, and 7-Eleven, to name a few. And each time the company created a system to meet the needs. For example, Coca-Cola Enterprises has a history of having long-term employees. Like, so for example, people will oftentimes start working there in their teenage years and maybe retire, say 65, 70. Same is true for another client I do a lot of mediations with, the U.S. Postal Service. Again, you have long-term employees, and the companies realized to decrease turnover, to decrease absenteeism, to improve morale, they decided to put in a system that would encourage people to communicate early and often and to resolve disputes early and often. And so Coca-Cola designed a program, which we work with them on, to create a 4-option system for dispute resolution. And that included talk, which means if there's a dispute, talk to one another. Secondly, they put forth a number of options if people needed help talking. And they took existing systems such as HR or ethics hotlines or EAP, the Employee Assistance Program. And they also implemented like an ombuds, but they put all of these under support. So if employees weren't comfortable with talking either to another employee or with their manager, they could use these support systems. The third option was mediation. And mediation was available both internally, so we trained a number of members of management, employees, HR, other places to help them resolve disputes internally. And they offered external mediation. And lastly, they had an arbitration option, which if they were unable to talk it through, the support systems didn't work, mediation didn't work, either internal or external, you could go to arbitration. And the other interesting thing is that they made use of this dispute resolution system as a condition of employment. You were not allowed to sue the company. For example, either a class action lawsuit or an individual lawsuit. And they found that each time an employee wanted to challenge that right, the court rejected it based on that the way the system was designed was so fair that they said you're going to get a better a process and better due process through this company system as preferred, as opposed to going through the courts. One thing that Coca-Cola did is they wanted to make sure it was built with the employees' input from the very beginning. So when they originally did these survey, they said, yes, let's respond to dealing with conflict, and let's get in your involvement. So they created employee-based focus groups, and members of the employees were represented on the design team. So it was really had the buy-in from the employees. And that was really important because there were critical times when there were employees who were fearful of a system that really prevented them from going outside of it, because one might think by default, like, okay, this is a system that's paid by the company that's intended to, in many ways, adjudicate an outcome. So it was really something that was very, wise of them to involve the employees, and important for them to do that, because you can't just have a top-down approach on this. And then also when it came down to mediator selection, as you asked, that is done where there's not, say, one or two mediators who are selected from within the division. They would seek mediators who were trained by us outside of a particular division. So if you had a dispute with a manager, the mediator would not be another manager, but perhaps someone else from outside of the division, so the conflict of interest was decreased. usually starts with someone within the company sees the value of ADR. They may not be sure about how to implement it. That's where they come to us. But they're saying, we need to develop a system that is responsive to the employees and responsive to management. So if you find you have somebody internal who has credibility, who has a commitment, and has the ear of key decision makers and people who have the purse strings, that they will be able to see it through. So we're able to bring our expertise and our experience of helping other companies design the systems. But we also work with that internal person who is able to see it through. And that person may be a general counsel, it might be a member of HR, it may be a member of the management team, it might be somebody who is specific to the company. Yeah, we make it an important component of the design to have evaluation mechanisms that are done by them, but also we make a commitment to come in as a neutral provider. And a lot of times the answers that the employees give to somebody internally will be very different from somebody externally. So the premise here is that they want to know if the system is working. And if they don't, then they won't ask. But if they do, they'll be open to our follow-up with the employees about how is this being implemented. But usually I find that if someone's going to go the distance with putting in an ADR system, they want to know if it's going to work or not, or why even bother. So it's a combination of internal monitoring, and we found external monitoring. And also really, taking that feedback and making sure that it's continued to be, implemented and folded into new design. And I also think just the idea of actually working with the employees that sought this at the beginning to make sure that they continue to be involved. So it's not just, again, a top-down approach, but actually the people who will most likely use this and benefit from this will hopefully be part of the assessment process and can provide feedback, and so it's a joint effort. I mean, I can't think of one company we've worked with where the general counsel hasn't been supportive of it, because I think the general counsel has a lot of sway and influence over the decision makers who will often say, let's move forward with this or not. So I think that even if, say, HR approaches us of saying, look, we'd like to implement an ADR system, I like to talk with other key players in this, and one of them is absolutely the general counsel, because a lot of times they're going to be giving advice to what's best in terms of a strategy for managing disputes. It might be a pending litigation, and they might bring us in to provide mediation services. It might be that they see the value of having an ombudsman process involved, where they can get feedback and understand trends. But I think it actually it's usually, I wouldn't say, I wish more and more general counsel were aware of the benefits of ADR. And I think those that embrace it and don't see it as a threat to their position, because a lot of times general counsel might say, well, if disputes are managed more effectively, will I be needed? And I think that is, there's so many other things that really aren't appropriate for ADR, well, they'll be needed. And especially within ADR, we work with a lot of general counsel within the mediations themselves, advocating for their client, but also looking at the big picture of figuring out, like, how do we resolve this? Either if it's an employee or a franchisee or whomever, general counsel plays a key role in providing, advice that can also, utilize ADR. And given our past conversations about that, ADR is being in a way introduced in Armenia now. This seems to be just a kind of a wonderful opportunity, because just like many other parts of the world, conflict is a growth industry, and no one's exempt from it. It's inevitable. And so the question really is, what are they going to do about it? And I think the opportunity that anyone has going into an emerging market is to figure out what are the pain points, and for them to say, interesting, so you do have a solution for that. What is it? And that's where it gets back to identifying a particular method of ADR that would affect it. And maybe the use of mandatory arbitration may be backfiring on some companies, where they are the use of mediation may be more effective, or perhaps increased training where people can kind of resolve the disputes early and often, as opposed to getting to a later stage. So I also think there's an opportunity to take a look at the different industries that you mentioned, and find out which companies here in the U.S. have had successful ADR programs, and to use that as almost like an example, like in a way a white paper that would say, here is a company in a different area, but there's so many similarities. This is the problems they had, which are mirror what you're dealing with. This is the solution they implemented, and perhaps there's even somebody who is willing from the company, say in the U.S., to be able to talk with their counterpart in Armenia, so they could say, this is what we went through, and actually this is something where this is what we learned, or I wish we knew this before we implemented it. And I think also there's an opportunity. A lot of people who are very proud of their ADR system. So I think you'll find, or at least I found, that there are people who are part of ADR systems who are very proud of what they did and are willing to kind of share their experiences. Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's interesting. I think there's lots of room for improvement. But I still think the quality of the service is there. I think what we need to focus on is the quantity. Like, I think there's not enough companies that are using it. So I don't know if we have to reinvent the wheel of what's being provided. I think the question is like, how can we get more companies to use it? That's why I even think, just like here in Boston, there's so many opportunities with companies that really could benefit from ADR who are not using it.